Hi, I'm John, and in this video I'm going to be replacing a rear derailleur cable. It's very easy to do and shouldn't take any more than 15 or 20 minutes max of your time. Now I'm going to be replacing the cable on this Comotion tandem road bike, but the procedure is exactly the same for every other kind of bike, whether it's a mountain bike, a road bike, single bike, tandem bike. Also, for bikes that have front derailleurs, the procedure is also basically the same for replacing a front derailleur cable for bikes that are equipped with front derailleurs and multiple chain rings. Let's get right to it. All right, before we get started, let's talk about the tools and materials that are needed to replace a cable on a bike. First, you're going to need a wrench to loosen and then retighten the cable anchor bolt. In most cases, that's going to be a 5mm hex wrench. On some cheaper bikes, the cable anchor bolt is going to be a 9mm nut, so in which case you'll need a 9mm wrench, like this. Next up, you need a suitable way to cut the cable and housing. That's what these are, a good pair of cable cutters. These are designed specifically for cutting bicycle cable housings and cable inner wires. If you don't have a proper pair of cable cutters, but you happen to have a rotary tool, like a Dremel like this, with a cutoff wheel on it, you can use these, and this will work equally as well. I would avoid trying to cut cable housings with something like this, because this is not going to give you a nice clean cut and it can end up really damaging the end of the housing. You want a really nice clean straight cut on each section of housing, and these are not going to give you that clean cut. But what you do need one of these for is to crimp the cable end cap. Once the cable is installed and trimmed to length, you'll be installing a cable tip on it like this, and that's where these come in handy. Pliers, whether they be regular pliers or long nose, needle nose like these, this is kind of an optional tip, but it does make the job a little bit easier. And this is just so you can grab the end of the cable after it's fed through the derailleur and pull it tight. Next up, you're going to need a small amount of grease to lubricate the inner wire between the housing. And you're going to need some cable housing end caps for the ends of each section of housing, the inner wire, cable itself, and a cable tip. As you can see here, I purchase all my materials separately and in bulk, but if you purchase the cable as a cable replacement set or kit, it will include everything that you need. The correct amount of housing, correct number of ferrules, cable wires, and additionally cable tip. Very important to note that you use the correct type of housing. There is brake cable housing for bikes equipped with cable brakes, and then there's derailleur housing. These are not the same, and one should not be used in the application it is not designed for. Okay, to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is remove the old cable. But before I even do that, I'm going to make sure the bike is shifted into the smallest cog on the rear. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is grab my cable cutters and cut off the cable end cap from the cable itself. Then I'm going to grab my 5mm Allen wrench and loosen the cable anchor bolt on the derailleur to release the cable. Then I'm going to pull the cable and housing right out of the derailleur like that. Just let it fall and hang there. Next, we're going to move to the front of the bike and pull the cable all the way out of the frame. I'm going to remove the housing and then the old cable from the shifter. Grabbing the new cable housing, I'm going to line it up and measure it against the old section of housing and cut it to proper length using my cable cutters. Alternatively, what you can do to get the correct length is grab your bulk section of long housing and stick one end into the shifter and stick the approximate location where the other end would be on the frame, and then turn the handlebars all the way from side to side like so, and make sure the cable has enough slack that it doesn't pull itself tight. That's how you'll know where to create the cut. Next up, I'm going to match up and cut the length of housing for the rear of the bike, the section that goes directly into the derailleur. Once again, you could also achieve the correct length by just installing the housing into the cable guide in the frame and then seeing how much of a loop you need here for the correct length to line up and make the cut. In this case, it'd be somewhere right here, but since we've already got an old housing section to use as reference, I won't be doing that. All right, back at the front of the bike here, I'm going to grab my new cable inner wire. You can see it's got this end. This is pretty much a standard barrel end for shifter cable. I'm going to grab it by the other end and feed it through the opening in the shifter. Once again, the shifter should be all the way released in the position for top gear. I'm just going to feed the cable all the way through. all the way through the shifter until the barrel end is firmly seated in its seat inside the shifter. Next, I'm going to grab the sections of cable housing that I cut a few moments ago. I'm also going to grab cable ferrules and put a ferrule on each end of each section of housing. In this case, this would be 4 required for the rear derailleur of this bike. Okay, before I feed the cable wire itself through the housing, I'm going to lubricate the cable by applying a small amount of grease directly to the cable inner wire. And this is only on the section of cable that would actually run through the housing. Only need a little bit here. And with that done now, I'm just going to feed the end of the cable into the housing and pull it all the way through. Then I'm going to just feed the cable wire through the cable guide at the front of the frame and pull it all the way through, and also make sure that the cable housing is firmly seated and anchored in the cable guide at the frame and also the cable seat on the shifter. Next up, I'm going to feed the cable inner wire through the cable guide underneath the bottom bracket and pull it all the way through. I'm going to pull that all the way through like that. Your bike may be different. Your bike may have top tube cable routing or internal cable routing. Then, as I did at the front of the bike, I am going to lubricate the section of cable that runs through the rearmost section of cable housing on the bike with a very small amount of grease. I'm going to grab my rear section of housing and feed the wire through it like that. Place the housing in its cable guide on the frame. This derailleur happens to have a dust boot for the rear section of housing, so I'm going to install that. Not all derailleurs have that. Push it up here a little bit out of the way, loop it around, and I'm going to feed the cable inner wire through the derailleur, pull it all the way through like so, and then make sure the cable housing is seated in the barrel adjuster like that. Making sure the cable wire is properly seated in its anchored position in this groove between the derailleur body and the anchor bolt. I'm just going to pull that somewhat tight, and I'm going to tighten up the anchor bolt with my 5mm Allen wrench. Okay, now that I've got the cable all installed, it's time to trim off the excess inner wire, adjust the derailleur, and then we're done. Right now I'm going to trim off a bunch of this excess so it doesn't get in the way. I'm going to trim it a little bit on the long side so I can use this to adjust, and once we're finished I'll cut it shorter, somewhere around this length. Next, I'm going to shift the bike all the way up into the large cog on the back. What I'm going to do next is a very important step. I'm going to hold the shifter all the way against its stop, and I'm going to grab the cable wire and pull on it firmly. That is going to seat and compress every section of housing between the shifter and the frame, and all the way at the back of the bike between the frame and the derailleur. By doing this simple but important step, you save yourself from having to adjust the rear derailleur in the future. Of course, if you have a bike with internal cable routing and no exposed sections of inner cable, then you won't be able to do this, which means whenever you replace a cable, you may have to readjust the derailleur moving forward. Okay, now that I've preseated the cable housings, it's time to check for proper indexing of the shifts and do the final adjustment. I'm going to shift the bike back into the small cog, the high gear. I'm going to grab my Allen wrench and my needle nose pliers. I'm going to loosen up the anchor bolt one more time. I'm going to grab the cable wire with the pliers, and with the bolt loose, I'm going to pull the cable tight, and then I'm going to tighten the anchor bolt back up again. Now I'm going to check again for proper indexing of each shift. Okay, so the adjustment is now complete. The bike is shifting perfectly through all of the gears. In the event that the chain wasn't indexing and shifting properly from one gear to the next, then you could make fine-tune adjustments with the barrel adjuster on the derailleur or using the barrel adjuster at the front of the bike. With mountain bikes, the barrel adjuster is usually located on the shifter, so any fine-tune adjustments will have to be done there. Since everything back here is good, I'm going to reinstall the rubber boot over the barrel adjuster. So now I'm just going to trim the remaining cable to its final length. I'm going to leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. Then I'm going to install a cable end cap, a cable tip to prevent the cable wire from unraveling. And then I'm just going to crimp it in place. Just like that. And that concludes the installation of a new derailleur cable on this bike. If you found this video helpful, please check out some of the other great videos on this channel. And if you're interested or just curious about tandem bikes, check out my other YouTube channel, which is dedicated exclusively to tandem bikes and tandem bike related content. Thanks for watching.